So let's talk about the hip hinge and the kettlebell deadlift in general. So the hip hinge is great for force production. It's great for getting your hips back and improving some space in the back of your hips, both unilaterally and bilaterally. And it's also great for putting some muscle on your posterior chain and to support your back as well. Now, when you do something like a kettlebell deadlift, you want to keep it close to your center of mass as possible. And that really goes for any deadlift. Even if you think about like a barbell RDL or a barbell deadlift, a lot of times when people will come up, they'll scrape their shins on the way up. The further the weight moves away from your center of mass, the more difficult it's going to be, number one, because you're at a mechanically disadvantageous position. But also number two is when the weight moves away from your center of mass, that's when you start to really put some stress on your lower back where you don't really want it. So the way I would typically coach a kettlebell deadlift, which is where I start a lot of people with the deadlift variation, is typically I'm elevating it off the ground, number one, especially for people who are tall or for people who don't have a ton of hip internal rotation. I think that that's really important because that will keep them moving out of their sacrum and their low back. And they're really just they're getting true hip internal rotation, they're getting true tension through their hamstrings and glutes. So usually it's elevated off the ground. Number two, when I'm coaching this, is I'll just say, set up like you're going to deadlift, get down to the bar or get down to the kettlebell, and then just stop. And then I want to see where they're actually feeling tension through their body. And this also helps them build some proprioceptive awareness as well. So what I would do is I would demonstrate it and I would say, okay, line the handle of the kettlebell up with your inside ankle bones. And then from here, let your knees bend, but don't let them translate forward at all during this lift. Instead, let them bend and then send your hips back all the way to the far wall. And then I want you just to reach down to the bell. And then before you lift it, where do you feel tension? And if they're doing it correctly, they'll feel tension through their glutes and hamstrings. They won't feel it through their back at all. And then I'll say, okay, you feel that tension through the back of your legs. I want you to use that tension to then bring your hips all the way through and stand up straight, put your head through the ceiling. Another good cue is to keep your eyes about 5 to 7 feet in front of you, because a lot of times people will take their neck out of a neutral position and they'll extend it this way. So typically I'll have people go through that. I'll have them kind of experience what it's like to kind of build tension through the back of their hips. And then once it looks good, it's just like, yeah, go ahead, rip out like 10 of those. So typically I'll demonstrate it and I'll say, okay, send your hips back, build some tension through here, reach down, straight up, straight down, and then rinse and repeat.